A high-yield fund paying 10% can technically get you to $1,000 a month faster than one paying 3%. But reaching the number first doesn't necessarily mean you've built the better portfolio. So I ran the math on 3 different dividend strategies: high current yield, dividend growth, and a blend of both. One gets you to $1,000 a month fastest, another gives your income more room to grow afterward. And the best overall balance isn't the obvious answer. One quick note: these are simulations using fixed yields, returns, and monthly contributions. Real markets move, so treat every timeline here as an estimate, not a guarantee. With that said, here's the math, using data from July 2026. Start with the baseline. $1,000 a month is $12,000 a year. How much you need invested depends entirely on your yield. At 3%, that's $400,000. At 5%, $240,000. At 7%, about $171,000. At 8%, $150,000. At 10%, $120,000. That range, $400,000 down to $120,000 just by changing the yield assumption, is exactly why buy the highest yield you can find feels like a shortcut. Whether it actually is one depends on something most people never check. Does that yield survive the next 15 years? Or does it quietly shrink the account that's paying it? Path 1. Stack the highest current yield you can find. JEPI is the clearest example. As of July 2026, it's yielding around 8.2%, paid out monthly. JEPQ is a similar idea with more NASDAQ exposure and typically a higher yield and more volatility. The two aren't interchangeable, so for the math in this video, I'm using JEPI specifically. JEPI generates much of its income through an options-based strategy, equity-linked notes layered on top of a large-cap stock portfolio, rather than purely from the dividends its holdings pay out. That's a legitimate, well-documented strategy, not a scam. The trade-off is that options income strategies like this can give up part of the market's upside during strong rallies, and their monthly distributions can fluctuate rather than growing steadily like a typical dividend payer. Run the numbers. $150,000 invested at an 8% yield gets you $1,000 a month. Investing $500 a month and reinvesting everything at a 10% total return gets you there in about 12.5 years. Genuinely fast. And the winner on this list for pure speed. The catch is what happens after you arrive. Because the strategy trades away some upside for income, its growth engine tends to be weaker than a standard equity fund's, which matters if you want that $1,000 a month to keep growing with inflation for the next 20 years, not just hit the number once. Path 2. Dividend growth. This is SCHD, built around companies selected for dividend quality and financial strength, which gives the portfolio more direct participation in long-term business and dividend growth. It yields a modest 3.2% as of July 2026, and it has a history of meaningful dividend growth, though the exact growth rate shifts depending on the period you measure. The problem is the low starting yield. At 3.2%, you need $375,000. Even with growth pushing total return to roughly 8.5% a year, $500 a month gets you there in almost 22 years. Of the three approaches, it offers the most conservative balance between current income and long-term growth. But it's still a stock ETF that can drop meaningfully in a bad market, and it takes the longest to reach the target. So here's the part most videos on this topic skip. The blend isn't the fastest path to the first $1,000. The high-yield fund wins that race, 12.5 years versus just over 16. What the blend gives you instead is the best balance between reaching $1,000 reasonably fast and giving that income room to keep growing afterward. For the simulation, I'm rounding JEPI's yield to 8% and SCHD's to 3%. So a 50-50 blend starts at roughly 5.5%, which drops the required balance to about $218,000. Half your money is still participating directly in businesses that grow their dividends over time, so you're not fully dependent on option income that can fluctuate and doesn't have the same predictable growth profile as a dividend growth strategy. At a 9% blended total return with $500 a month, that's just over 16 years, a few years slower than pure high yield, but with a portfolio built to keep paying you more over time instead of just holding the line. Now, here's the variable that changes this timeline more than any fund choice does. And it isn't the yield, it's how much you contribute. That same blended strategy at $500 a month takes just over 16 years. Bump it to $750 a month and it drops to about 13. Push it to $1,000 a month and you're looking at just under 11. Fund selection buys you a few years either way. Contribution rate buys you 5 or 6. If you're actually trying to speed this up, the highest leverage move isn't hunting for a better ETF. It's finding an extra $250 or $500 a month, even temporarily. Let's make the blend concrete. Starting from zero, adding $500 a month, reinvesting everything at a 9% total return. By year one, you've got about $6,250 invested, generating roughly $29 a month. By year 5, around $37,700, generating about $173 a month. The unglamorous middle stretch nobody puts in a thumbnail. By year 10, under our 9% assumption, the portfolio is now expected to add more through growth than the $6,000 a year you're contributing, and you're near $97,000, generating about $443 a month. By year 16, you're around $213,000, generating just under $1,000 a month, right on schedule to cross the finish line a few months later. The first several years feel painfully slow, and the last several feel fast. That's what compounding looks like from the inside. And it's why most people give up around year 3 when the number still looks small. One question I'd bet shows up in the comments: why not just buy something yielding 20% and get there even faster? On paper, 20% only requires $60,000. In practice, distributions at that level are far more likely to get cut or come with meaningful share price decay in a rough year. And when the yield gets cut, you need more shares to make up the gap, bought with a smaller check. That's not a faster path. It's a way to turn a 15-year plan into one that never quite recovers. A couple of notes on the specifics. Tax treatment. The qualified portions of distributions from funds like SCHD may receive the lower long-term capital gains rate, while some or much of JEPI's distribution may be treated as ordinary income depending on its year-end classification, and this depends on your country and personal situation. So treat it as a U.S.-specific rule of thumb, not a universal one. Inside a Roth IRA, qualified withdrawals of dividends come out completely tax-free, a real edge if you have access to one. And for the example modeled in this video, the structure is a roughly 50-50 split between JEPI and SCHD. That allocation isn't automatically right for everyone. Your age, taxes, timeline, and need for current income all matter. In practice, pick your split. Automate the contribution so it happens whether you feel like it that month or not, and reinvest everything until you're within a couple years of your target. Turning off reinvestment early is one of the easiest ways to quietly add years to your own timeline. Once a year, check whether the split has drifted and rebalance back toward whichever side has fallen behind. 3 honest estimated timelines. About 12.5 years if you go all in on high current yield and accept a portfolio with less room to grow afterward. Just over 16 if you blend for a balance of speed and durability. Low 20s if you go pure dividend growth and prioritize capital stability above everything else. None of them require stock picking or a finance degree. Just a reasonable structure, consistent funding, and enough time for compounding to do what it does. If this kept you from dumping your whole portfolio into whatever fund has the flashiest yield this week, that's the whole point of this channel. We're currently 113 investors strong, which technically counts as a financial empire if you don't check the numbers too closely. Subscribing costs nothing, and I'll pay it back in videos. No yield trap attached. See you in the next one.